All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring one of the absolute most persistent and frankly eerie aviation mysteries of the entire internet age. We're talking about the legendary, bizarre tale of Pan Am Flight 914.
So picture this for a second. A commercial airliner takes off on a totally routine flight, packed full of passengers just heading down to a sunny vacation destination. But somewhere along the way, it simply vanishes. No distress signal, no crash site, literally nothing, just a total erasure from the sky. Now, that alone is terrifying enough, right? But what if I told you that this very same plane, at least according to the legend, descended from the clouds and touched down on a runway nearly 4 decades later? I mean, is it truly possible for a flight to just vanish into thin air, completely bypass the laws of physics and time, and reappear a literal lifetime later? That is the wild premise we are dissecting today. Okay, so just looking at the timeline of events here, the sheer impossibility of this story hinges on this massive 37-year gap. You've got the takeoff and disappearance in 1955, then fast forward to 1991, and Pan Am Airlines actually shuts down for good. Yet, a year later, in 1992, this ghost flight allegedly makes a shocking landing. So how exactly does a plane belonging to a completely defunct airline land almost 40 years after it originally took off? Let's get into it.
Let's go all the way back to the beginning. The story goes that in 1955, Flight 914 took off from New York heading down to Miami. And by all accounts, the weather was perfectly clear, the winds were calm, it was an entirely routine takeoff. But then, exactly 1 hour and 45 minutes into the journey, the aircraft just completely vanished from radar screens. Poof, gone. It was as if the plane had just erased itself from the sky. There were 0 warning messages sent to air traffic control, no mechanical issues reported, and absolutely no emergency signals broadcasted whatsoever. As you can imagine, the immediate aftermath was just pure chaos. Florida Air Traffic Control was left completely stunned because every single passing second destroyed any hope that this was just some routine communication glitch. So a massive search operation was launched. The Navy and the Coast Guard deployed ships and aircraft all over the Atlantic Ocean, frantically scouring the waters. But guess what? They found absolutely nothing. No debris, not a single drop of jet fuel on the water, no scraps of metal, nothing. It was literally like the flight never even existed. Days turned into weeks, which led to these tragic newspaper headlines screaming, "Vanished in sky." After 10 agonizing days, authorities officially declared the plane missing. They presumed it crashed, with no survivors, closed the case, and those poor grieving families were forced to just abandon all hope. Now fast forward a massive 37 years to a busy, totally modern morning in May 1992. We're at the Simon Bolivar International Airport in Caracas, Venezuela. Everything is normal, right? Planes are coming and going, the morning sun is shining on the tarmac. But then this unexpected shadow just appears on the radar screen. Air traffic control operator Juan de la Cortez spots a blip that honestly had 0 business being there. It wasn't registered in the transponder system at all, and there was absolutely no prior notification of its arrival. And when they finally got a visual on it, it appeared to be a 1950s-era Douglas DC-4 aircraft. Basically, a flying relic from another time suddenly interrupting a modern, busy airspace. At first, the control room figured, maybe it's just an old military plane or some private pilot making a massive navigational mistake. But when they finally managed to make radio contact, the voice on the other end literally froze the blood in their veins. The pilot identifies himself as Captain Miguel Victor, and he says, "This is Pan Am Flight 914, requesting permission to land from New York to Miami." The control room was absolutely terrified, because remember our timeline from earlier? Pan Am had permanently shut down the previous year, in 1991. And this specific flight number, that belonged to the exact same plane that vanished without a trace back in 1955. And the physical reality of the plane sitting there on the runway was just as much of a shock. Security and medical teams rushed out to the tarmac, only to find this literal relic covered in dust, with peeling paint and rusty wings. There were 0 modern navigation systems on board. But guys, it gets so much stranger. Because when the doors finally opened, the passengers stepping out looked like they had walked straight out of a vintage photograph. You had women wearing 1950s knee-length skirts, men in classic fedoras and vintage suits, and get this, they were all holding handwritten paper tickets. No barcodes, no digital data, just old, weathered paper. Now, as if the rusty plane and the vintage clothing weren't bizarre enough, we hit the most suspenseful anomaly of this entire legend. The passengers hadn't aged. Literally, not a single day.
The source material highlights this one specific, incredibly chilling detail. A woman stepping off the plane was holding a 3-year-old child. Now, if that child had boarded the plane in 1955, they should have been over 40 years old stepping onto that tarmac in 1992. But they hadn't aged a day. The passengers just looked completely bewildered, staring at this modern 1992 airport like they had just landed on an alien planet.
Well, as you'd expect, the situation on the tarmac very quickly unraveled into total chaos. Step 1. Air traffic controller Juan de la Corte approaches the aircraft with a security team to investigate and question the crew. Step 2. The pilot, seemingly suddenly realizing that they were definitely not in 1955 Miami, absolutely panics and abruptly slams the door shut. And step 3, without a lick of clearance or even a single radio signal, he fires up those old engines, aggressively taxis down the runway, takes up into the sky, and completely vanishes back into the clouds forever. The Venezuelan airport staff were just left standing there entirely stunned, staring up at an empty sky. The plane was never seen again.
Time travel or a clever script? Okay, hold on. We've just walked through this incredibly cinematic, mind-bending ghost story, but now we really have to ask the critical question. Are we actually looking at the greatest documented case of time travel in human history, or is this just an incredibly clever piece of fiction? Let's pivot here and take a hard look at the actual facts.
So, it turns out the initial spark that ignited this massive global myth was an explosive article published in 1993 by an American tabloid called the Weekly World News. Now, some local variations actually popped up in 85 and 92, but this specific publication really took the story and ran with it. They added these wildly unverified claims. They published fake, super blurry photos of the alleged passengers. They even claimed the military secretly seized everyone on board for covert testing. They threw around all these sci-fi buzzwords like time dilation and dimensional rifts. They even went as far as to claim that Juan de la Corte, the ATC operator, was forced by the government to sign a strict non-disclosure agreement to keep the whole thing hushed up. But, when actual journalists and fact-checkers started digging into these claims, the entire myth collapsed like a house of cards. So let's uncover the truth. Here are the indisputable facts that just completely dismantle the story. First off, official aviation records confirm that absolutely no Pan Am flight, nor any other commercial flight for that matter, went missing on that date in 1955. It just literally never happened. Second, the Weekly World News was a notorious supermarket tabloid famous for publishing entirely fictional, sensationalized garbage. We're talking stories about half-bat, half-human children and alien encounters. And third, all those dramatic black box audio recordings floating around the internet that supposedly capture the pilot's panic, yeah, those are 100% fabricated modern creations, completely faked just to generate clicks. So what we're actually looking at here is a super fascinating case study in the anatomy of a viral legend, and really the evolution of fake news. Step 1. A local tabloid prints a literal work of fiction just to sell some cheap papers at the grocery store checkout line. Step 2. The internet gets a hold of it years later. The story gets digitized and wild online speculation mutates it. Suddenly, people are adding the Bermuda Triangle, alien abductions, and crazy government cover-ups to the mix. And finally, step 3. We reach the modern era of viral media, where content creators literally produce fake black box recordings and digitally manipulate old photos to present evidence to millions of viewers, packaging this entire myth as a historical fact. So what does this all mean? Well, Flight 914 didn't slip through a crack in time. It slipped through a crack in our media literacy. Honestly, it just goes to prove how much we naturally want to believe in the extraordinary, and how easily a completely fabricated newspaper article from the 90s can transform into a digital legend that is literally still fooling people today. It really leaves you wondering, as you're scrolling through your feeds later today, what other supposed historical facts on your timeline are actually just well-crafted pieces of fiction just waiting to be debunked? It's a crazy thought. Anyway, keep questioning everything you read, stay curious, and I'll catch you in our next explainer.